Here we are on the River Blackwater, and the wind is just perfect for learning the single spey cast. So what do I mean by that? There are different casts for different wind directions, and the most important reason that we need to think about is always what way's the wind blowing, because when we discover which ways the wind's blowing in, then we can keep ourselves safe. And that's what's really important. So here the wind today is blowing up the river ever so slightly, but it's blowing up the river, and that is suitable for the single spey cast. Now, when I first heard of single spey cast, double spey casts, I thought the single spey cast might actually be a bit easier to learn than the double spey cast, and how wrong was I? So the single spey cast, most anglers find one of the most difficult casts to learn. And the reason they find it difficult is because it actually looks very easy and it doesn't look much different from a basic roll cast. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go back to the roll cast momentarily to show you what the main difference is between the roll cast, which cannot change direction, and the single spey cast, which is just like its big brother. It's a jumped up version of the basic roll cast, which does enable us to change direction. So if we backtrack just a little bit and go back to the basic roll cast, we have the paintbrush and the paint tin. We lift up a little bit with the tip of the rod, out to the side, cutting those trees, climbing up the banana into your key position. And during all of this time, the line has just been dragged along the surface of the water. So the line has not left the river during your basic roll cast. And because of this, the line is still in my way if I actually wanted to cast across the river. So remember, we cannot cross over our own railway track. So if we try and cast across our own line, what happens is that we get ourselves entangled. So the main difference between your roll cast, which is just dragging the line along the surface and then being able to cast directly back to where you came from, and the single spey cast is about lifting your fly line out of the river, flying it back, giving it wings and popping it into the river, which is above your intended target. So the most important difference is, instead of dragging the line back like this and the line still being in your way, what we have to do is we have to lift, we sweep the line up and out of the way of our intended target. And the most difficult part then of that cast is being able to sweep the line out of the river and put the anchor back in the river again. So we're going to show you how to do that. So with the single spey cast, the first thing we're going to do is to make sure that our line is straight and start with the paintbrush in the paint tin. At this moment in time, I'm going to cast straight back down to where I came from, as opposed to changing direction with it, just to show you what's happening. If I was going to change direction with the cast, then the first thing that I would do is make sure that my feet are opposite target before I put the paintbrush in the paint tin and I have the rod on this side of my body, so that I can then use my body as a pivot to cast across the river. But right now what I'd like to show you is my feet are downstream and opposite my target, and I'm just going to teach you how to lift and sweep. So there's a few stages of this cast. We lift, sweep, splash and go. Lift, sweep, splash and go. And like all things, let's start from the beginning and talk about the lift first. So we start with the paintbrush and the paint tin. We're going to lift the rod, and that lift depends very much upon how deep you are in the river, how much line you have out, or how long your head of line is. So we're going to lift, and when we lift, we want to release the little hands in the river which are gripping hold of your fly line. We want to do this really gently. So nice and slowly lift. What I don't want is this, where we hear this hoiking noise as it's coming out of the river, because when we do this, of course, we scare away all of the fish. So everything is nice and slow and controlled. So we lift first. We need to lift high enough so that when I begin my sweep, that I don't feel as if I'm dragging the river with me. So if my lift is too low, then when I start my sweep, I get all of this dragging sensation. I don't want that. Everything should feel light. Everything should feel nice and light and airy. So it's lift, sweep, splash, go. Lift, sweep, splash, go. So the sweep, and if we take the word sweep and we take the letters off the word sweep, and we start with SW, so swa, and then we have EEP, eep, swa, eep. So the first thing we do is we lift, After we lift, we're going to swoosh. We need to pull the tip of the rod, keeping the tension against the top of the rod and making sure that the rest of the line breaks free out of the river. And you can see this happening. So what we're looking for is, we're looking for the line to break free out of the water and start to fly. And when it's flying, then we just slowly eep the line back into the water. So during the first part of the cast, we lift nice and slowly. Then we swoosh, eep. So we're looking for this nice, gentle swoosh, eep. If we're too fast with a sweep, and most of us have been single-handed casting before we come to the double-handed rod, and with a single-handed cast, the overhead cast is a very important cast to us. And quite often what we get is that we have built-in muscle memory of doing the overhead cast. So we always want to put this little flick in the back. And if we do that, then what happens is we go out the back, the anchor doesn't sit back in the river, and we have the problem of hitting all of the trees and bushes behind us. Lift, there's no flick, it's a nice gentle sweep. Lift, sweep, splash, and cast forwards. Now you've learned how to cast forwards. It's about flicking the mud off the top of the stick over the top of the hill. So it's whoosh in the forward cast. So it goes lift, sweep, splash, whoosh, stop, relax. Lift, sweep, splash, go. Lift 2, 3, sweep 2, 3, shoot. Lift 2, 3, sweep 2, 3, shoot. Many people have different ways of learning this. Some people like that little bit of a waltz timing. Some people prefer lift 2, 3, sweep, don't move, cast. Now if I wanted to cast across the river, feet to target, waist pivoted back downstream, because I'm going to use my waist to help me create my sweep. Paintbrush painting, lift, sweep, splash, go. And what you see here is the line has come up, sat back in the river above my intended target, so that when I cast across the river, that I don't have to cross over it. So it's lift, get the line up and out of the way, and aim to the left of where the track is lying. So how to remember this is, if the wind is blowing up the river, we need to use our upstream arm. And here on this side of the river, my upstream arm is my right hand. So I put the right hand at the top of the rod, I lift and I sweep, and I always want that D loop, the rod and the line creating this D, to be blowing away from me, never towards me, to make sure that I remain safe. So it's lift, making sure the D loop is always blowing away from you, and then flicking the mud off the stick. This cast does require practice. So please, after 10 minutes of trying this and not getting it, keep going, look at this video a few times, go out there with renewed, invigorated spirit, give it a go. It's not easy to begin with, but when you get it, it's a beautiful cast, especially in low water conditions, because the splash is a nice gentle kiss on the water and off it goes, as opposed to its alternative, which gives us a bit of a rip here and out. So using this cast, low water conditions, floating fly lines, intermediate tips, normal size flies. I hope you enjoy learning it.